You're listening to the HawgBeat Hour with Andrew Hutchinson, Alex Trader, and Mason Choate on ESPN Arkansas and HitThatLine.com. Now, here's your host, Mason Choate.
Welcome into a special Thanksgiving edition of the HawgBeat Hour. I'm Mason Choate, joined by Andrew Hutchinson and Alex Trader. Guys, there was a great game last Saturday, Arkansas versus Alabama. I don't know if any of us expected it to be that way. I felt like Arkansas would be competitive, and I had heard from some Alabama people that they didn't feel great about it. But I don't know if I would have guessed that it would have come down to the fourth quarter, basically. Hutch, just from your perspective, I mean, Arkansas played great, would you say?
Yeah, if you had told me before the game that Arkansas would have the ball in the fourth quarter with the chance to take the lead, I would have said, "Sign me up 100%." That would be incredible because what we've seen with this series lately is that it's a blowout. The last four games, I believe, were decided by an average of 39 points. Obviously in favor of Alabama. So to get a competitive game like that, not just competitive, but competitive down to the wire, requiring an onside kick recovery, or I guess onside kick out of bounds. That says a lot of what Arkansas has done this year and how far they've come in a short amount of time under Sam Pittman.
Alex Trader, I want to ask you. You're the Ohio State expert. Jamison Williams really burned the Arkansas defense, and Bryce Young, the Alabama quarterback, did a great job. I mean, threw for 559 yards and 5 touchdowns. So we knew going into this game that Arkansas was going to have some trouble shutting down that Alabama offense. But did you expect 559 yards from Bryce Young and then add on almost 203 touchdowns for Jamison Williams?
No, I did not expect the over 500. I think, and if you were watching the game on mute, it might have been one of the quieter 500-yard performances possible, just because it seemed like the offense was just moving at a normal pace. Even though you end up scoring quite a bit of points, it seemed like it was pretty consistent, and then you have the big catch and run every now and then, and that's what you get with Jamison Williams. You get, here's a slant across the middle. He's just faster than everybody else. You saw it at Ohio State, and you've been seeing it all year this year. He's one of the best receivers in the SEC. The last play, you can argue if that was a catch or not. I don't think it was, but that's that's just kind of turning stones at this point. But I think you did see on that one play where he beat everyone deep. You saw that multiple times at Ohio State, and it's just something that, the dude's got speed, and it's going to be tough for anyone in the country to cover him.
More importantly for our listeners, Treylon Burks, 8 catches, 179 yards, 2 touchdowns, and he did it. I don't know what percentage we would say he was at, but he clearly was not at 100%. And we talked about KJ Jefferson putting the offense on his back against LSU. I'd say Treylon Burks put the offense on his back against Alabama. Hutch, we're just so lucky to get to watch that guy play. And you know that you might have just one more game with Treylon Burks, maybe 2.
Yeah, it's sad to think about that, but he's probably going to be a first-round pick and probably a high first-round pick this coming April. But to see the season he's had, even though I don't even know if he's been 100% healthy all year. I mean, he had the nagging, foot or ankle or whatever it was at the beginning of the year. And, they talked about him being kind of beat up, coming out of the open date, using that to get healthy. And then, having some sort of shoulder or chest injury or something, early in that game against Alabama. I mean, it was the second series of the game that is the one that he missed. And to still go out there and make the catches he did. I mean, he was making incredible back shoulder catches. He was outrunning Alabama defensive backs. I mean, guys that are, probably have NFL futures. That is a huge, huge credit to him, and probably, as I say, made him some money once the draft rolls around.
The guy throwing the ball to Treylon Burks, KJ Jefferson. I mean, it seems like every single game he's getting better. You talk about KJ Jefferson and he protects the ball. I think, before the season they talked about we want 65% completion percentage. I believe I saw a stat he's at 66%. So, I mean, KJ Jefferson, this is a guy that you're going to be able to count on next year to be one of the top quarterbacks in the SEC. And Hutch, I mean, where do you think he comes in the SEC right now?
Well, here, I'm going to give you a stat first. So KJ Jefferson threw for over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions, and completed 70% of his passes against Alabama. The only other quarterback that's done that against Alabama since Nick Saban's been the head coach, you might have heard of him. His name's Joe Burrow. So pretty incredible and good company to be in. And he's been phenomenal. I think I read where he's completing 76% of his passes in November. And that's not even with a cupcake game mixed in there. I mean, that's against Mississippi State, LSU, and Alabama. Three really good defenses. So he has been incredible. I think he deserves to be right up there in the conversation, top 3 or 4 quarterbacks in the SEC this year. Bryce Young, he'll be back next year, but Matt Corral is going to be gone. Stetson Bennett has had a pretty good year this year. He's probably going to be gone, I think. There's some other guys in the league, but I think KJ Jefferson has a legitimate case to be preseason All SEC coming into next year. Obviously, behind Bryce Young, who could still potentially win the Heisman, but right behind him, KJ Jefferson. He's going to have to find someone else to throw the ball to because, as we said, Traylon Burks is going to be gone, but he has got all the talent and stuff to make you really, really excited moving forward because he is just a redshirt sophomore.
It would be hard to talk about this game against Alabama if we don't mention some of the biggest moments of the game, and it comes down to some of the calls that were made on the field, including the Dominique Johnson touchdown run, and then the play that came before that, the Warren Thompson catch, and then Alex Trader, you mentioned the Jamison Williams touchdown catch. So I just want to ask you, I don't even know what to ask. Just like, what are your thoughts on what happened? Because it feels like it wasn't just Arkansas fans who felt like something was wrong. It seemed like it was a consensus around the country that it just wasn't right.
You had Bo Nix coming out, who's been the beneficiary of at least 3 wins in his career based solely on officiating, coming out and saying, Alabama gets unfair calls. It was ridiculous. You were sitting there in the living room and you just had no idea what was going to happen because that Dom Johnson touchdown run couldn't have been a more clear touchdown, and they had to go review it. It made no sense. I thought the play before was probably a touchdown based on what was called on the field. I didn't see enough to necessarily overturn that. But that happening the very next play, like, let's see if him getting 3 yards in the end zone was actually a touchdown. And then you come down to that catch at the end. It was, I believe it was 4th down or maybe a 3rd down waiting to force a punt. And it's in the back of the end zone. Probably should have been caught a little bit cleaner than it was. As good as Jamison Williams is, he bobbled it a little bit. He didn't have possession of the ball when he was going to the ground, so he had to establish himself and finish through the catch. He didn't do that. The ball was moving. You could see it hit the ground. And then not only was the officiating bad, I thought the announcing was particularly poor in this one. There was you saw a lot of what a lot of people complain about when you're watching an Alabama game, and you can see why. It was even just watching, trying to be like, this is what's happening in the game. If you were just listening to the game, you would think Alabama was up by 100 points. And that's kind of a disconnect between what the viewers are looking for and what you were getting from that announced team.
Probably the biggest play of the game for Arkansas, at least, was the Reed Bauer touchdown pass. I feel like maybe Arkansas has used up their fake field goals for the rest of the year, but what it does is it takes a little bit of pressure off of Cam Little and the O-line when they're blocking for field goals, I guess, because the other team has to be on their tippy toes thinking, are they going to fake it or not? So Hutch, I mean, just what a play that was. And then do you think maybe they might run another one?
Yeah, that's going to be tough. I mean, you've already ran 2 in back-to-back games. I don't know if they've got anything else up their sleeves, but credit where credit is due. Scott Fountain has been heavily criticized by myself, by many others, but the special teams have seemed to be improved. And then you throw in the extra dynamic of the fakes. I mean, credit to him. And I think, maybe they don't have any fake field goals up their sleeve. They seem to have a lot of trick plays on offense. Maybe they try something on a punt. I don't know. I mean, Reed Bauer he didn't look particularly fast on his first down run against LSU, and he didn't look particularly comfortable throwing the ball on the fake field goal against Alabama. Sam Pittman said that earlier in the week he was couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. So I would say we're probably done seeing fake field goals, at least this year. I mean, maybe they have something dialed up for next year, but for right now, I think we're done seeing that on the field goal unit.
Real quick here, Hutch, we got to wrap it up, but I want to ask you just about the Arkansas defense. It's late in the season. It was Alabama, but are there any glaring issues where you think maybe this could be a problem in these last two games?
Well, I don't think they're going to face anybody quite like Jamison Williams again, so it's kind of take that with a grain of salt. But I mean, Sam Pittman said if they were running, deep, I think they call it cloud coverage, where you got 3 deep safeties, where your only job is don't let someone behind you, and yet Jamison Williams somehow got behind them. That's a credit to him having elite track type speed. I don't think Missouri has anyone quite like that on their roster, and I don't think whoever they get matched up with in the bowl game is going to have that, because I don't see them playing Ohio State in the college football playoff or anything, or something like that. So you don't have to face elite level receivers like that. But it is concerning that you still let a guy run by you in those coverages, and that was concerning. But hey, you got to give him credit for stopping the run very, very well, especially early on, getting a 4th down stop like they did, getting tackles for loss. They did get a few sacks. There were some good things. They just ran into an elite offense and an incredible quarterback on an incredibly hot day in Bryce Young.
All right, well, that's going to do it for Alabama talk. Coming up, we're going to talk hoops. Arkansas goes to Kansas City. They play Kansas State and Cincinnati. Hutch will talk with Jackson Collier, JC Hoops, about that. And then we're going to talk about Missouri. Hutch is going to talk to a Missouri expert. And then we're going to talk about ourselves here on the HawgBeat Hour.
You're listening to the HawgBeat Hour with Andrew Hutchinson, Alex Trader, and Mason Choate on ESPN Arkansas and HitThatLine.com.
Welcome back to the HawgBeat Hour. I'm Andrew Hutchinson. We're going to hit pause on that football talk for a second, because Arkansas also has a top 25 basketball team, and they are coming off wins over Kansas State and Cincinnati in the Hall of Fame Classic up in Kansas City. I'm happy to be joined now by our HawgBeat hoops expert, Jackson Collier. Jackson, I know you stayed up late and watched these games. I'm curious, kind of just in general, before we really dive into it, what were your main takeaways from that 2-0 start?
Well, it was impressive in general, just being able to go in and beat 2 high major programs. Basketball is different from football, where, you have the Power 5 in football, but you have different conferences in basketball, like the Big East, the American Conference, and some others that are still considered high major because they still have a lot of talent. Cincinnati is going to go up against SMU, go up against Memphis, go up against Houston, and Cincinnati has a really good team, so that's a really big win. And then on the other side, Kansas State being in the Big 12, that's a really solid high major victory. Both wins look really good on a resume, and just as far as overarching themes for the team go, I was really impressed both with the team rebounding and team defense overall. Some areas to work out offensively, some areas to be more consistent, but defense and rebounding were just really stuck out.
Yeah, we'll start with that first game against Kansas State. Arkansas jumped out to an 18-point lead. I think it was an 18-point margin at halftime. And then Eric Musselman did the patented stall ball that he has become famous for, or infamous for, in the state. I'm curious kind of what your take is on how they played it that last 10 minutes against Kansas State, kind of letting them dig back into it, but not enough time for them to pull off the comeback.
So the first 10 minutes of the second half, it wasn't necessarily stall ball. So it was that final 10 minutes, like you said. And that first 10 minutes looked like Arkansas played a little sloppy, played like they knew they were going to win maybe. That was kind of what brought the margin a little bit closer. Now, when Musselman went stall ball, I think Arkansas was up 10 maybe when stall ball started, or up 8 or 10. And that ended up being around the final margin. Essentially, it did what it was designed to do: minimize the number of possessions, minimize the number of opportunities that Kansas State would have had to come back and win the game. And, what we saw Arkansas do was go isolation with either JD Note or Chris Likes. You'd space out the floor and just go ISO, get to the bucket, and see if you can draw a foul, or you can make a layup. And that's what happened. Chris Likes iced it with 10 consecutive free throws down the stretch. JD Notae kept getting to the rim, and there were a bunch of shots too. It would have been a larger margin of victory. JD missed 2 or 3 kind of contested layups that he normally makes too. But the whole scheme and the philosophy of stalling there worked in their favor. I guess that was Monday night, and it's worked in their favor for the most part since Musselman's been at Arkansas.
And in the second game against Cincinnati, they jumped out to a really early lead and then kind of let it slip. And that second half, I think there were like 11 lead changes. I'm curious, they did that without shooting the ball worth a darn. I mean, they could not hit water if they fell out of a boat, as people like to say. And I'm curious kind of what your take is on them being able to find a way to win against a solid Cincinnati team despite those shooting woes.
It just really speaks volumes to the level of composure and the just overall ability to win games on this team. You have Audice Toney being able to grab rebounds and finish at the rim and draw fouls. And he's hitting his free throws a lot better this year than he ever did at Pitt. I think he's shooting around 78 or 79%. I could be off on that number. But around there this season from the free throw line. And I think he was shooting around 67% at Pitt last year. And that was his highest single season percentage. Outside of that, you still had, some shooting woes, like you mentioned, but you still have guys scoring the basketball. Connor Vanover was getting to the free throw line. He was putting the ball in on putbacks and stuff. JD Notae was getting to the free throw line. Chris Likes was getting to the free throw line. So when you look at the ability to score the ball with the time stopped at the free throw line, that's a great way to be able to come back and claw yourself back into a game. There were times Arkansas was down as much as 6, I think, maybe just 4. Either 4 or 6, Arkansas was down late in the game. And it just being able to draw fouls and stop the clock and make free throws really helped them claw back in. And that's the kind of stuff you have to do if you're not hitting your outside shots. And they kind of it seemed like they didn't shoot as much in the second half when it was a close game, when their shots weren't falling. They kind of picked up a little bit later after JD had hit another one. He took a couple more in the second half and made a couple more. I think he finished 2 for 7 from 3, which isn't terrible considering that the team was 0 for 10 in the first half. But the ability to score at the free throw line, and then also the ability to prevent the other team from scoring. I mean, they did a really good job of playing defense and keeping Cincinnati from scoring a ton of points either. So you got to look at it from that lens too. If you're not hitting your outside shots and you're not scoring a ton, well, one way to, I guess, minimize the importance of that is if you play good defense, you force turnovers, you rebound the ball and shorten their Cincinnati's possessions, and you just play good defense and make them miss.
You mentioned Audice Toney there for a little bit, the transfer from Pitt. He really took, I mean, to me, it seemed like he just really was relentless on the boards. I think he scored 19 points against Cincinnati, also 14 against Kansas State. I'm curious if he's kind of lived up to what you expected, or is there anything about his game that maybe has surprised you a little bit?
I was really high on Toney coming into this offseason. I put all over on the HawgBeat forum and even a little bit on Twitter that I thought he was going to be the most important and most impactful transfer. I think I even at one point used the word focal point of the team. Now, Muss has gone out of his way to say they don't draw plays for him, so focal point might have been a little inaccurate, but I do think that he is that most important piece. And I think he's lived up to and surpassed any expectations that I had for him. I expected him to do a lot of what he's doing, maybe not be as good of an offensive rebounder as he has turned out to be. But I also expected him to be more of a wing threat, more of a shooting threat outside. He's shooting, I think, 50% from the 3-point line this year, but he's only shot 2 or 4. But either way, he has that capability. But what he's really proven is that he's one of the best cutters or slashers in the country. He always finds the open spot. He has great IQ, great feel for the game, and obviously great effort. I mean, a lot of getting offensive rebounds is effort and just feeling where the ball might bounce, knowing where the ball might bounce, feeling the right spot. So you get those two traits together. You get the effort, you get the feel of the game, and you're going to have an elite offensive rebounder, and that's what Tony is. He has 19 of the team's 60 offensive rebounds on the season, which is right at that 33% number, which is like last night where he had 6 of the team's 18 offensive rebounds. So he, by himself is accounting for 33% of the team's offensive rebounds. All in all, surpassed my expectations there and kind of on pace with what I thought he would do offensively, just in a different way.
Another guy I wanted to talk about a little bit, extra is Jalen Williams. He doesn't really score a lot, but man, he does basically everything else. I mean, is there anybody that maybe his game reminds you of, whether it be college, pro, and then just kind of what do you make of his season so far?
It's hard to say that his game reminds me of anybody because it is really unique to have a 6'10 center / power forward who will draw 4 charges a game, who will lead the team in assists and have a positive assist to turnover ratio, while also being able to knock down the 3. I think coming into last night's game, he was shooting 40% from 3 on the year, 2 for 5. I think he missed 1 last. I think he was 0 for 1 last night, so that might have dipped a little bit, but all of that is just a very unique skill set. So I don't know if I can necessarily peg one specific type of player. I know a lot of Arkansas fans will say he harkens back to Big O. That was before my lifetime, so I can't make a for sure comparison there. But I think if you look at statistically, Big O is probably a more gifted scorer, but everything else kind of probably lines up. But as far as his season, I really thought that he would take a big step this year, and he has so far. I thought maybe he would have been utilized more offensively, maybe more in the pick and pop game, maybe letting him shoot more of those threes. He's only shot 6 on the year, I believe, and I think a couple of those were as the shot clock was expiring. So still not shooting a ton, not scoring a ton, but he gets garbage baskets occasionally. He'll get offensive rebounds. A lot of times he'll pass out of offensive rebounds because he has great court vision, and best time to shoot a three-pointer is off of an offensive rebound. But all in all, his defensive effort, his defensive just mindset is one of the best on the team or even in the conference. The ability to draw 4 charges in one game like he just did, that's just uncanny, especially at his size. The ability to pass as a big is so underrated. It's great that he's getting so much attention for it, but if you have a post player who can pass, your offense opens up completely. If he can somehow find a way to, I don't know if it's just because he's not being asked to or they don't need him to right now, but if he can find a way to kind of hone his low post offense, score a little bit in the low post, and maybe score a little bit on that pick and pop action, he could be one of the best players in the conference, maybe even the country, because then you add a little bit more efficient scoring, more efficient offense, and just being a more potent scoring threat. You have one of the best rebounders in the country, one of the best post passers in the country, and a legitimate 10+ point scorer all in one player. But still great strides from last year to this year.
Yeah, I mean, I've been really impressed with his play this year. I mean, the passing that he has is just phenomenal. And you mentioned Big O, Oliver Miller. He's kind of the guy that I've seen people make comparisons to as well, but he, like you, was before my time. So yeah, it's been a really good start to the season for Arkansas. They are 5-0 now. They've got a matchup with the Penn Quakers out of the Ivy League coming up. I know the Ivy League can kind of be tricky sometimes. They play some good basketball up there for a bunch of smart people. So that's going to be a good matchup. I can't remember the start time off the top of my head, but I know that game is Sunday. And so you should be able to make a fun weekend of Arkansas sports with the football game on Friday and a day off. You can maybe watch some other college football, and then on Sunday, get into Bud Walton Arena for a game against the Penn Quakers. So with that, coming up after the break, you're going to be hearing my conversation with Gabe Yarman from PowerMizzou.com. Gave some really good insight on the Tigers ahead of this matchup, and that's coming up after the break.
You're listening to the HawgBeat Hour with Andrew Hutchinson, Alex Trader, and Mason Choate on ESPN Arkansas and HitThatLine.com.
Welcome back to another edition of Know the Foe. I'm Andrew Hutchinson, the managing editor of HawgBeat.com, your Arkansas site in the Rivals Network. The Hogs gave number 2 Alabama a scare last week before falling 42-35, and now they're back in Fayetteville for their annual Black Friday matchup with Missouri. With that, it's time once again to go to behind enemy lines for some insider perspective on that upcoming game. Gabe Yarman covers the Tigers for PowerMizzou.com, our friends over at the Missouri Rivals site. And he was kind enough to give us some time today. Gabe, appreciate it. How are you?
Not bad. Just trying to pack everything into like 2 days this week,
Exactly. It's always a short week for the football team, but also a short week for us sports writers. So, let's start with kind of a 10,000-foot view of Missouri's season. I know they had some close losses early, probably a disappointing start, but they've won their last 2 games, and now they're eligible for a bowl. How would you characterize year 2 of the Eli Drinkwitz era?
Well, it didn't start well. Actually, that's not true. It started okay. I mean, they put up a game at Kentucky in week 2, and everybody actually came out of that a little bit encouraged. And then I think where it really swung was week 4. They lost in overtime at Boston College, and Connor Bazelak threw an interception. And then for the next 4 weeks, Missouri was just awful. I mean, didn't even show up against Tennessee, barely showed up against A&M. I mean, both those games were basically over 8 minutes into the game. And they were sitting, 3-4, and everybody thought, we don't know where this is going. They got healthy against North Texas, but then they go down, and it's weird to say in a 43-6 loss that they found some things they felt good about, but they went to Georgia and they actually played decent run defense. They had a couple freshmen move the ball at quarterback, and they felt okay coming out of that game. And then they came back, had a little confidence, beat South Carolina, beat Florida. And all of a sudden people are saying, hey, if you could get one more win, this thing really ended on a good note, right? Because I think preseason expectations were about 7-5. Some people had 8-4, but if they could beat Arkansas, this season probably ended up exactly where they'd expect, but maybe not in the way they expected. That said, obviously beating Arkansas is a little tougher than probably most people thought it was going to be 3 months ago.
Yeah, for sure. And diving into things more specifically ahead of that Arkansas game, I'm wondering what you could tell us about Connor Bazelak. I know he's been hurt and missed some time, but has he made the strides you would expect from a quarterback in his second year as a starter?
Short answer, no. Longer answer, no, not at all. I mean, his numbers look very similar to what they were a year ago, but it hasn't been as good a year because last year his big strength, I mean, he was prototypical game manager, which everybody said his redshirt freshman, no issue, man. Just, you don't have to go win games, just don't lose them. And he didn't do that as a freshman. And then this year, after that interception against BC, for his next, I want to say 5 games, he had 9 interceptions. And I mean, it was like 1 touchdown and 9 interceptions. It was not good at all. He got hurt at the end of the Vandy game, didn't play Georgia, but Missouri fans have wanted a new quarterback for a solid month. And Eli Drinkwitz just hasn't done it to the point where the last 2 home games, I mean, Bazelak was booed, and fans will say, well, no, we were booing the coach. No, you were booing the coach for playing the quarterback. Everybody knows what you were booing. And, they've got a redshirt freshman named Brady Cook who has played a little bit, who we don't know a ton about. He's done what they've asked him to do. The one the fans want is the true freshman, Tyler Macon, because he's a 4-star kid, top 250, Elite 11 kid out of East St. Louis. And he just isn't ready. And it doesn't matter how much you tell the fans, look, he isn't ready. He can't go win games right now. That's the guy they want. They want to see him on the field. It's not going to happen this year. Bazelak is the guy. And look, he deserves credit, right? He threw a game-winning 2-point conversion against Florida. Like that was a big play. Missouri fans, it'll be interesting to see what happens this offseason because they've got 3 quarterbacks. They've got a top 150, 200-ish type kid coming in, Sam Horn, next year out of Georgia. Now, he's a baseball player too. He's not going to be here in the spring, so that might limit his ability to win the job. But I think Missouri goes into spring football with at least a 3-way competition for the starting quarterback next year.
And it hasn't been all bad on offense, though. I mean, this may surprise some folks, but Tyler Beatty, the running back, is 4th nationally and leads the SEC in rushing. But looking at his game-by-game log, it seems like he either goes for 200 or he's held under 100. Well, why is that?
Yeah.
I mean, is there anything you've noticed with his season?
Well, there are a couple things there. The Southeast Missouri State game, he had 9 yards for 9 carries for 81 yards, and then they sat him for 2 quarters. The Georgia game, he had 9 for 41 and basically didn't play the second half because that was out of reach the other way. So yeah, he's got 4 200-yard games. He had 146 last week against Florida, including 2 carries for 25 yards for the touchdown in overtime. I mean, he has been, a couple weeks ago, somebody asked Eli Drinkwitz just what's his value been? And he said, well, he's been 5 wins valuable. And that time Missouri was 5-5. Now, what you take from that is Missouri doesn't win a game without Tyler Beatty on this team. And it's not that far from true. I mean, they still would have beat SEMO. They probably still would have beat North Texas. But I think that's it. I don't think they win another game without him on this roster. And it's weird to say that the most valuable player in the SEC is on a 6-5 team. But I'm not saying Beatty's the best player in the SEC. I'm just saying if you take him off this team, it truly makes a 4-win difference. And I don't know if there's anybody else you can say that about in this league.
That's impressive. And just I'm excited to see what he looks like on Friday. But moving over to the other side of the ball, Missouri, statistically at least, has the second worst defense in the conference, ahead of only Vanderbilt. Is that a matter of talent? Is it a scheme issue? Are there injuries that have led to it? Or what would you kind of diagnose those issues to?
I feel like you just took that question directly off my message board for the first 2.5 months of the season, because that's what everybody wants to know. And the weird thing is, it actually has been pretty good for the last 2 weeks. But it was, I don't even have words. I mean, I called it the worst defense in the history of organized football on our site a couple times. It was horrendous. I mean, they gave up almost 300 yards rushing to Central Michigan in the opener. And everybody said, well, it's the first game. And this Lou Nichols kid, who actually is the second leading rusher in the country now, you never know. And then they gave up over 300 to Kentucky. And everybody said, yeah, but Kentucky likes to run the ball. And then they just kept doing it. I mean, they could literally, all you had to do was turn around, hand the ball off, and you were getting 7 yards of play. That's not even an exaggeration. It was like 6.8 yards a carry for the first half of the season. They have made some personnel changes. They moved Chad Bailey in at middle linebacker. Blaze Aldridge, a transfer from Rice, who started this season at middle linebacker, actually got benched. Now is playing the weak side linebacker. So they've kind of flip-flopped that. Devin Nicholson has gone from starting every game for 1.5 years to 4 snaps the last 2 weeks. That's made a difference. But is it talent? A little bit, but they weren't nearly as bad as they looked. Is it scheme? Probably a little bit, but they've gotten better. So 2 things are at play that people don't like to acknowledge. One, they just have improved, right? They're playing better. And 2, we hate the answer. Well, what's wrong? Well, we're just not executing. But that really is the answer. Like, Missouri's defensive line was getting beat up front for 8 games. And I mean, I'm not just talking about kind of moved out of the way a little bit. I'm talking about you went back and watched plays and they were getting moved off their spot by 3 and 4 yards. And those guys are winning battles now. Isaiah McGuire looks like a guy who should be, maybe get some preseason all SEC talk next year. Trajan Jeffcoat has suddenly become the player we all thought he was going to be at the beginning of the season. So more than anything, they're playing better now.
I think some Arkansas fans might argue with you about the worst defense in organized football. It's not too far removed from John Chavis. So,
okay.
But I digress. You kind of mentioned a few guys right there, but I mean, who are the key players on Missouri's defense that Arkansas fans should be aware of on Friday?
Yeah, I mean, Jeffcoat and McGuire at defensive end, I think, kind of set the tone for this defense. I mean, like I said, they really didn't do anything up front for 7-8 weeks, and now those guys are playing well. Those have been the league's defensive lineman of the week each of the last 2 weeks. So those guys are important in helping set the edge on the run. Bailey is a guy that has changed things up a little bit at linebacker. And then in the defensive backfield, they get a kid, their slot corner, which I mean, I assume that means he's going to be up against Treylon Burks quite a bit, is Chris Abrams-Drain. He's a kid who actually came to Missouri in the 2020 class as a receiver. made the switch to defensive back about halfway through last season. And he's been Missouri's best defensive player. I think he's got 4 interceptions. He's had another couple taken away by penalty. But him and then Jalen Carlisle at safety are, they've been opportunistic. I'm not going to say they've been perfect because nothing on this defense has been perfect. There have been some hiccups, but those two both have like 4 picks and have made some plays.
And as we all know, I mean, everyone can talk about the Iron Bowl and, Michigan, Ohio State, but this is the famed Battle Line Rivalry presented by Shelter Insurance.
Yes.
It seems like Coach Drinkwitz up there is, based on his comments at SEC Media Days and stuff, has kind of bought into the rivalry, and Sam Pittman has said all the right things and with the media, but the fans here in Arkansas aren't quite there. What's kind of the feeling up there in Missouri, the fan base? Do they buy the rivalry?
I mean, it's the closest thing they have to a rivalry right now, I guess. I mean, the truth is Missouri's series against South Carolina has been a more entertaining series. And it's been, I say more competitive. I don't mean to say this hasn't been competitive, but let's be honest. Arkansas's got to win one here to get that going back a little bit, but it's getting there. It's okay. I think there are some storylines with Drinkwitz being, he talked about this week sitting in the southeast end zone and in Reynolds Stadium and watching games, and how it'll be a little bit weird to go back. And obviously Barry's down there, and now Trey Williams and Markel Utzi are playing. So, and Sam Pittman long ago was an assistant here. So there are some ties, but it'll be interesting to see going forward. I mean, we haven't really had a year where both of these teams are actually good and playing for something at the same time. Arkansas obviously has really rebounded this year. Missouri's 6-5. I mean, really, I don't know what these teams are playing for other than a little bit of pride and a little bit better bowl game. It's decent, right? I mean, maybe get the corporate sponsor name off of it, but I don't know. Drinkwitz made a big deal of winning the Mayor's Cup 2 weeks ago against South Carolina. So I guess if there's a trophy, it's a big deal.
Yeah, for sure. And finally, the last thing I got for you. Last I checked, I think Arkansas is a 14.5-point favorite. You don't necessarily have to give a prediction here, but I'm curious what maybe you would say the keys are to Missouri, staying in the game, and do you think they're capable of pulling off the upset?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, that line was higher than I expected. I definitely expected Arkansas to be favored, but I thought it'd be closer to 10. Now, I think the lines are a little bit skewed by the fact that legitimately Missouri was the last team to cover in America. The first time they covered, they were a 38.5-point underdog to Georgia, and they lost by 37. So, but they have now covered 3 straight weeks. It was a little higher than I thought, but Arkansas is clearly the better team so far. They're playing at home. And I think Missouri has to just limit the huge plays for Arkansas. I mean, make them, if they're going to go 80 yards, and they're going to go 80 yards a couple times, then make them do it on, 9 plays, 10 plays, 11 plays, rather than letting Burks loose for 70 or something like that. So I think that's huge. And then offensively, I mean, they've just got to do something to help Tyler Beatty, because I don't think it's realistic to say, hey, we'll just have Tyler Beatty get 300 yards from scrimmage and win this game. I mean, it's happened a few times, but this would be Missouri's best win of the season. And so they're going to need some other guys. They're going to need something out of the passing game. They're going to need some guys to make some plays, because I don't think it's reasonable to go in and win this game 17-14.
Yeah, I'm expecting it to be a little bit more high scoring than that for sure. That's all I got for you, Gabe. Thanks again for giving us some insight on the Tigers. As a reminder to everybody, this game is on Friday at 2:30. It's going to be on CBS. And if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button, so that way you can always see these Know the Foe interviews, as well as press conferences, practice clips. We got recruiting videos up there. And then, as always, be sure to check out HawgBeat.com for coverage of all things Arkansas.
You're listening to the HawgBeat Hour with Andrew Hutchinson, Alex Trader, and Mason Choate on ESPN Arkansas and HitThatLine.com.
All right, back here on the HawgBeat Hour, we're going to talk about Missouri right now. Guys, this is a Missouri team that just became bowl eligible over a Florida team that consensus is they're not very good. They fired Dan Mullen, so for good reason. But you look at Missouri, they haven't really beat anybody good. and it hasn't been that impressive. And Hutch, you talked with Gabe, and Gabe said they might only have 2 wins if it wasn't for Tyler Beatty. So what do you think about this Missouri team, and do you think that they're kind of just one-dimensional on offense?
Yeah, it sure seems like if you stop Tyler Beatty, then you stop Missouri. I mean, he's a threat on the ground. Obviously, he's 4th in the country in rushing, and a Doak Walker finalist. But he also is effective through the air. I mean, I think you said he's got like 53 receptions or something like that. That's pretty impressive for a running back. So if you stop him, you probably stop their offense. And yeah, I mean, this is a Missouri team that should not scare you. I mean, they do have some decent pieces. I mean, they're still an SEC team, so they're capable of beating you. They're not Vanderbilt, but they did struggle against Vanderbilt earlier in the year, and they lost to Boston College. Their wins are against like maybe South Carolina is their most impressive win, or Florida, which, as you said, is not exactly impressive. So this is a team Arkansas should beat, on paper. But again, it's Arkansas, Missouri. Weird things happen in this game, and you just never know how it's gonna finish up until there's zeros on the clock.
Yeah, you always got to take into account the rivalry factor, and we know that a lot of people don't consider this to be a rivalry. They think that it's kind of forced, I guess, but it seems like it's sort of becoming one. You hear from the players, you hear from the coaches. I feel like there's a little bit more to this game than there has been in the past few years. So, Alex Trader, I want to ask you about Connor Bazelak, the Missouri quarterback. He's kind of struggled this year. Hutch said before we started recording that, I mean, some Missouri fans are calling for him to not start anymore. So, you think Arkansas can take advantage of this guy and the struggles that he's been having?
Yeah, I think you certainly would be happy to have him coming in after what happened last week in the passing game. Bazelak, coming into the year, I had him as one of my favorite quarterbacks in the SEC to kind of pop off, because he did have quite a few, really nice games last season, and he just has not taken that next step at all. He's looking at 235 for 350, not really throwing the ball too much. 16 to 10 touchdown interception ratio, just not stuff you want to see from a starting quarterback of a team that is going to come in and knock off an Arkansas team that is ranked in the AP poll, probably going to be ranked in the CFP rankings tonight. It just doesn't seem like a great matchup for the Missouri offense to be coming in and trying to throw the ball against an Arkansas defense that has at times been very, very good against the pass, and at times been pretty bad. I think this is going to be one of those games where you could see Arkansas look a lot better than maybe they might actually be based on the quarterback play you're seeing.
So last year, KJ Jefferson started the game against Missouri, and man, he had a great game. Traylon Burks had a great game. Arkansas's offense had a great game. The defense, not that great. Lost 50-48, but Hutch, this Arkansas offense, specifically Dominique Johnson, and then there's some Missouri guys on the defense, the defensive line. Do you think that maybe this game means a little bit more this year? And not even just for those guys who have ties to Missouri, but for the guys, most of the roster who suffered that loss last year that they felt like they probably should have won.
Yeah, I mean, no one on this team has beaten Missouri, at least in an Arkansas uniform. You've got a couple of guys that played for Missouri. You mentioned them, Trey Williams, Markel Lutzy. They've been on the winning side of this rivalry game. But I think they really want to end that streak. I mean, just like they really wanted to end that streak against Texas A&M and get that trophy, they wanted to end the streak against LSU and get that trophy. Sam Pittman has said, they'd like to go 3 for 3 and have all 3 trophies at the Arkansas facilities. And that would be a huge thing to say for Arkansas, because I think whenever Sam Pittman got hired, people didn't expect him to come in and automatically beat Alabama and Georgia and teams like that. I think they were realistic. They said, hey, we just want you to, be competitive and, beat the Missouri, beat the Mississippis, maybe be competitive against the likes of A&M and, LSU. And he's done that. And so I think it's a big deal. I think it's especially a big deal for the guys you mentioned. I mean, Dominic Johnson, for those who may not remember, was previously committed to Missouri depending on who you ask, how that recruitment went down, it sounds like Missouri wanted him to play linebacker, but told him he would play running back. And Dominique's side says they were lied to. And then on signing day, he rips off the Missouri hat and shows he's got an Arkansas shirt on. So kind of a dramatic type of deal right there. I'm sure he's fired up. Sam Pittman said that he doesn't think he's going to be that fired up because he's just trying to play his best ball. But to me, that's coach speak. I think he's going to be ready to go and really wants to go out there and show them what they missed out on when they wouldn't let him play running back.
Now, this is a little weird, but if you look at Arkansas's record, they're 7-4. To me, there's a big difference between 7-5 and 8-4. And for Arkansas to win 8 games this year, if they are to beat Missouri, just how big is that? Because we've talked about the turnaround. Everybody talked about the turnaround that Sam Pittman has done, but with the expectations coming into this year, not many people would say 8 wins was realistic. And you're sitting here and you're 1 win away against a Missouri team that's been struggling that you should definitely beat. So just like how big of a deal would that be, Hutch?
2 years ago, Arkansas lost to San Jose State and was blown out by Western Kentucky. They were 2-10 in back-to-back years, and they had lost 19 SEC games in a row. That right there tells you how big an 8-4 season would be for Arkansas in year 2. They have come an incredible amount from where they were during that, Chad Morris era. They were terrible. They were the laughingstock of the SEC, and now not only are they, respectable, but they're actually good. I mean, you make a 2-point conversion against Ole Miss, and you maybe take advantage of one break here or there against Alabama. You pull off that monumental upset, and you're staring at a possible 10-win season. And I know close only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades, but that's still incredible. And they were not even competitive against crappy SEC teams just 2 years ago. So getting to 8 wins would be huge. I think it would help you when it comes to bowl selection. Maybe get to go to Florida for a bowl game instead of being sent to Memphis or somewhere like Houston that you've already been that you don't really get excited about. Yeah, I've been to Florida since the 2006 Capital One Bowl, the Capital One Bowl following the 2006 season with Darren McFadden, Felix Jones, and those guys. So that would be huge for Arkansas to get a bowl game like that. So yeah, eight wins would be just absolutely massive for this program.
Now, specific to the Arkansas offense here, I'm looking at this stat. Missouri is 125th in the country in rush defense. They're allowing 234.7 rush yards a game to opposing offenses. Alex, I mean, this is just right down the alley for the Arkansas offense, especially for a guy like Dominique Johnson, where, you've been seeing it from some fans. A lot of people think that he's going to go for like 200 plus. I don't know about that, but this Arkansas backfield should be able to have a field day with Missouri.
Yeah, I'd say the backfield itself is probably more of a lock to have a better game than just picking one guy, because there is that 4-headed monster back there. You saw Traylon Smith had a really good game against Alabama for the most part, was able to break off a couple of runs. I think with that matchup, especially with Traylon Burks maybe being a little bit banged up, he took that hit from Will Anderson at the end of that game. You're not really sure if you're going to be getting him. I know he did it against Alabama, but you're not sure if you're going to be getting him at that 80, 90, 100% range. I think it's going to be a huge day for the running backs, and it really comes down to how many carries do they want to give each guy, and is the offensive line going to be able to hold up? And if they're able to out physical and be out there and be tougher the way that they have in so many of these close games throughout the year and these rivalry games, then I think Missouri is going to have a really, really tough time stopping much of anything that Kendall Briles wants to do.
Well, it's at 2:30 here in Fayetteville, Razorback Stadium. Guys, let's just go ahead and talk about what we think is going to happen, give some predictions. Hutch, we'll let you go first. I mean, it seems pretty easy, but what do you think is going to happen?
I think the line opened at like 16 and quickly fell down to 14.5 points in favor of Arkansas. We heard Gabe earlier say that he was surprised the line was like that at that high. It makes sense to me, but I don't know if Arkansas is going to be able to cover it. Missouri is just one of those funky teams, and it's Black Friday. We saw it, with Arkansas and LSU. Sometimes Arkansas had no business competing with LSU, but were very competitive and pulled off a bunch of upsets on Black Friday. So I think it's going to be a relatively close game. I feel like it's going to be one that Arkansas controls most of the time, but they're never able to fully pull away and blow them out like I'm sure some Arkansas fans probably hope they do. So I would take Missouri to cover, but I think Arkansas wins the game.
Yeah, I mean, this is another one of those weird games where, you would think that Arkansas would just blow them out of the water, but it is the rivalry aspect. Missouri's coming off a big win for them against Florida. And then Arkansas, for the most part, they came out healthy against Alabama. Traylon Burks is a little beat up, but I don't know. I think that Arkansas, they've just taken it from Missouri so much that I think that they want to show Missouri that Arkansas is back, that Arkansas is they're a good football team now. So I just really see the Hogs controlling this game. I'm afraid that there might not be that big of a crowd because it is Black Friday, which is weird. But I don't know. I can see Arkansas covering for sure. Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, anytime you get past those football numbers, it becomes a little tougher because, Arkansas could dominate this game in every aspect, be up 21 points late in the fourth quarter, and one touchdown just sets that cover away. I do think the Razorbacks are good enough to do it. Missouri, really they're 110th in the defense or in the country in total defense. They've only outgained 3 teams on their schedule this season. Southeast Missouri, Vanderbilt, South Carolina really outgained by Florida last week. And that's a team that is really not very good. They were toe to toe with Stanford just 2 weeks ago. I think, last week, you get bowl eligible, you get that win over Florida. You had Drinkwitz bringing out the lightsaber and saying, "May the force be with you," as kind of a get back at Dan Mullen. And like you mentioned, Mason, I think this team was stomped on for the last couple of years. Last year's the start of a turnaround. They almost won a close one. And now I think, I don't like this term because of where it's been used in the past, but revenge tour really seems like what Arkansas has been on this year, going after those big wins and trying to collect those trophies. And I don't see any reason that Missouri should be able to stop Arkansas from bringing home another trophy this year.
Like I said earlier, kickoff 2:30 p.m. It's going to be on CBS in Fayetteville. So don't miss it. And thank you guys for listening to the HawgBeat Hour. I've been Mason Choate. He's been Andrew Hutchinson. He's been Alex Trader. Happy Thanksgiving.